The vote had already been counted 3 times. Each time the result was the same. Humanity's trade proposal, 7 years in the making, reviewed by 42 human economists, translated into 19 galactic languages, was rejected. Not debated, not amended, rejected in 11 minutes. Ambassador Walden did not show anger. He was 71 years old and had spent 4 decades in rooms where anger was a luxury no one could afford. He gathered his documents slowly, nodded to his 2 junior staff members, and began to walk toward the exit of the conclave floor. That was when Savrek moved. The Drekan envoy did not stand from his seat the way other species did. He unfolded himself, all 7 feet of armored scale and muscle, and stepped into the aisle with the deliberate ease of something that had never been told to stop. His deputy followed 2 steps behind. The chamber was still full. 40 species watched from their seats. The Thavari elder in the far row did not move, but his eyes followed everything. Savrek spoke in the common trade tongue, loud enough for the room to hear. He said that humanity's proposal was not rejected because it was poorly written. It was rejected because humanity did not belong at the table. 12 years of membership, he said, and humans still walked into chambers they did not understand, carrying papers no one would ever sign. He called them a young species with no sense of their own smallness. Walden stopped walking. He turned around. He did not say anything. He simply looked at Savrek with the patience of a man who had heard worse and survived it. That was when the deputy moved. It was not an accident. The deputy stepped forward and placed both hands flat against Walden's chest and shoved. Hard. Walden was not a young man. He went down. The sound of it, an old man hitting the floor of a galactic council chamber, was quiet. Almost nothing. But it landed in the room like something much heavier. No one stood. No delegate rose from their seat. No security officer on the floor moved toward the Drekan deputy. For 4 full seconds the chamber was completely still, and in that stillness was an answer that no species needed to translate. The answer was, "We will not intervene for humans." Walden's 2 junior staff members helped him to his feet. He had a small cut on his palm from the fall. He closed his hand around it, nodded to his staff, and walked out of the chamber without looking back. The footage was transmitted to Earth 6 minutes later. By the time it reached the full council chambers in Geneva, it had already been seen by most of the human diplomatic corps. The room that reviewed it was not loud. There were no raised voices. Senior officials watched the clip once and then sat in silence for a moment that stretched longer than most of them expected. One official asked what the standard response would be. File a formal grievance with the Conclave Ethics Board. Request a review. Wait for a decision that would arrive in 4 to 8 months and recommend no punitive action. Nobody in the room argued against that, but nobody moved to begin it either. A second official, quieter than the rest, pulled up a personnel file and placed it on the central display. The file was short. Most of it was blacked out. What remained showed a service record, a name, a current assignment, and a transfer request that had been pending for 2 years. The name was Arden Cole. Nobody in the room explained why that file had been pulled. Nobody needed to. A few of the older officials recognized the redaction pattern. The specific shape of what was missing told its own story to anyone who knew how to read it. 15 years of service, 4 deployments, commendations with no descriptions attached. The transfer request was approved that evening. Arden Cole received his new assignment at 300 hours. He read it once, set down the tablet, and looked out the window of his small apartment for a long moment. Then he packed 1 bag. He did not bring security staff. When his travel coordinator asked how many personnel would be joining him on the transport to Vel Morin, he said none. The coordinator asked again, certain there had been a miscommunication. Arden told her there was no miscommunication. He left the next morning. He wore a dark suit. He carried 1 bag. He had a small notebook in his jacket pocket that he wrote in occasionally, though no one who had ever worked with him knew what he wrote there. On the transport, A young human journalist who had somehow booked the same flight recognized him from the reassignment announcement and asked if he had a statement about the attack on Ambassador Walden. Arden looked at her for a moment. He said that Ambassador Walden was a good man who had served with great dignity. He said the situation would be addressed through appropriate channels. The journalist asked what channels. Arden smiled very slightly and looked back out the transport window. He did not answer. 3 days later, the transport docked at Velmorin. Arden Cole walked out of the docking corridor alone, carrying one bag, and moved through the crowded alien station with the slow and easy calm of a man who had already assessed every exit before he even stepped off the ship. Nobody on the station knew what he was yet. That was exactly how he preferred it. Velmorin was not built for humans. Nobody had said that out loud, but the architecture made it clear enough. The corridors were wide for species with broader frames. The ambient lighting ran slightly toward ultraviolet, and the air carried a faint chemical edge that was perfectly neutral for 4 of the 5 dominant species on the station and mildly irritating for the 5th. Humans were not the 5th. Humans were not in the calculation at all. Arden Cole walked through it without complaint. He checked into a mid-tier diplomatic residence block, not the section reserved for senior envoys, not the budget quarters, and spent the first 2 hours doing nothing that looked like anything. He walked the station's public corridors. He stopped at a food vendor run by a Thavari family and bought something warm in a small cup that was not quite tea but was close enough. He sat at a public bench near the central atrium and watched people move. Any observer would have said he was a tired middle-aged man, resting his feet. Any observer would have been wrong. By the time he returned to his quarters, he had counted 6 Drekken security personnel stationed across the public level, identified 2 intelligence observers from the Mervaki delegation, a species he had not been briefed on as a threat, which he noted, and located all 4 emergency exit shafts on the residential floor. He wrote 3 lines in his small notebook, then he requested a meeting. The message went to Savrak's office through the official diplomatic channel. Arden requested a private pre-summit discussion. He described it as a chance to resolve tensions before the formal session. He used careful, deferential language. He signed it with his title and nothing else. Savrak's office replied in 40 minutes. They agreed. This was the first mistake the Drekkens made, though they did not know it yet. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning in one of the station's neutral diplomatic chambers. When Arden arrived, Savrak was already there with 3 members of his delegation, including the deputy who had shoved Walden. The deputy was large even by Drekken standards, nearly 8 feet, with a ridge of dark bone plating across his shoulders. Savrak did not offer a greeting. He let the silence sit as Arden entered, using it the way his species used silence as pressure, as a display of ownership over the space. Arden walked in, set his bag down, and pulled out a small portable heating unit and a sealed container. He set water to heat, placed 2 simple cups on the table, and sat down. He did the whole thing without hurrying and without looking at Savrak. Savrak watched this and did not know what to do with it. In Drekken's social structure, ignoring a dominant display was either the behavior of something too stupid to understand the signal or something too confident to care about it. Savrak had never encountered a human who fit the second category. He was trying to work out which this was when Arden finally looked at him. Arden asked how the journey to Velmorin had been. Savrak did not answer. He leaned forward and told Arden directly that this meeting had been agreed to out of courtesy, but that courtesy did not change the Conclave's position or the Drekken delegation's position regarding humanity's standing. Arden nodded. He poured water into one of the cups and slid it towards Savrak's side of the table. He said he understood. He said he was not here to argue about standing. He said he was here because he believed it was important before the summit, to make sure both sides understood each other clearly. Savrak said the Drekken delegation understood humans clearly enough. Arden said he suspected that was not quite true. There was a pause. The deputy behind Savrak shifted his weight. Arden did not look at the deputy. Savrak told him to explain what he meant. Arden set down his cup. He said that most species in the conclave knew humanity through its diplomatic record, 12 years of membership, modest proposals, quiet votes. He said that record was accurate as far as it went, but it was also very new. He said the older record, the one that ran for several thousand years before humanity found its way to the stars, told a somewhat different story. Savrak made a sound that translated loosely as dismissal. He said humanity's history of fighting each other on one small planet was not relevant in galactic terms. Arden looked at him for a moment. He said that was an interesting way to see it. He said another way to see it was that humanity had spent several thousand years with nothing to practice on except itself, and had become, through that long and brutal education, extraordinarily good at the work. The deputy shifted again. This time Arden did look at him, just for a moment, just long enough. The deputy went still. Savrak studied Arden's face and found nothing there that he had a name for. Not aggression, not fear, not the careful blankness of someone trying to hide either. Just a quiet, even attention that felt, for reasons Savrak could not explain, like standing at the edge of something with no visible bottom. He told Arden the summit would proceed as planned and stood to leave. Arden thanked him for the conversation. He said he looked forward to seeing the full delegation tomorrow. Savrak left. His deputy followed. Neither of them spoke until they were 3 corridors away. In the diplomatic chamber, Arden finished his drink, packed his heating unit, and wrote 4 more lines in his notebook. Then he went to find dinner. The neutral chamber assigned for the pre-summit meeting was on the station's 4th residential level, away from the main diplomatic floors. It was a small room, 1 table, 6 chairs, walls of pale composite material that absorbed sound. No recording equipment was permitted in neutral chambers. Both parties had signed the standard station agreement confirming this. Arden had also swept the room himself, 20 minutes before the Drekken delegation arrived, using a scanner he carried in the lining of his bag. He found one device that should not have been there. He removed it and set it face down on the table where Savrak would be able to see it when he arrived. When Savrak entered with his deputy and 2 additional staff members, he saw the device immediately. He looked at it. He looked at Arden. He did not comment on it. He sat down. Arden thought that said something useful about Savrak. He filed it away. The meeting began formally enough. Arden had prepared a brief document, 2 pages, plain language outlining humanity's position going into the summit. He slid a copy across the table. He did not ask anyone to read it immediately. He gave the room a moment to settle. Savrak's deputy did not settle. He was the kind of creature who communicated through space, by taking it, by filling it, by making everything around him aware of his mass. He had positioned himself standing, slightly behind and to the left of Savrak, which in Drekken protocol meant he was functioning as an active presence rather than a passive attendant. Arden knew what that meant. He had been watching the deputy since the day before. Savrak began speaking. He said the document was unnecessary. He said the Drekken position was unchanged and would remain unchanged regardless of what was placed in writing. He said humanity should use the summit to formally acknowledge that its trade proposal had been considered and found insufficient, and that moving forward, human delegations should expect a consultation period before submitting any further major proposals, a consultation that would run through the Drekken mission office. It was framed in diplomatic language, a demand for a leash. Arden listened to all of it. He nodded once when Savrak finished. Then he asked a single question. He asked whether this proposal applied to all junior conclave members or specifically to humanity. Savrak said the details could be discussed. Arden said he understood. He made a small note on the paper in front of him. The deputy moved. It was not subtle. He covered the distance from his standing position to Arden's side of the table in 2 steps, reached down and closed one large scaled hand around the front of Arden's jacket, pulling him partially out of his chair. The deputy was twice Arden's mass, with a grip that could bend station railing. The message was the same one that had been delivered to Walden. You are small. You are here because we allow it, and we can end that whenever we choose. What happened next took less time than it takes to say it. Arden's left hand came up and found the precise gap between the deputy's third and fourth finger bones, and applied pressure in a direction the deputy's hand was not designed to bend. The deputy's grip released instantly, not because he chose to release it, but because the joint gave him no option. In the same motion, Arden rose from the chair, turned, and used the deputy's own forward momentum to redirect him sideways into the wall. He followed it with one controlled application of pressure at the base of the deputy's neck, just below the bone plating, at the point that Drekken anatomy shared with 7 other reptilian species in the known galaxy, and that Arden had spent 6 months learning in a training facility that no longer officially existed. The deputy went against the wall and stayed there. Arden held the position for 3 seconds. Then he released, straightened his jacket, and sat back down. The room was completely silent. The 2 Drekken staff members near the door had not moved, not because they were calm, but because they had not processed what they had just seen quickly enough to respond. Savrak had not moved either. He sat across the table and stared at Arden with an expression that was very hard to read. Arden looked back at him with no expression at all. He said he wanted to explain something, not as a threat, but as information, because he believed good diplomacy required accurate information on both sides. He said that before he had become a diplomat, he had done other work. He said that humanity, across its long history, had always maintained 2 things in parallel: people who talked and people who were trained for the moments when talking stopped. He said that most species in the conclave had only ever seen the first kind. He said that was a reasonable gap to have in one's understanding, and he did not blame anyone for it. He said he was offering the Drekken delegation the opportunity to walk into tomorrow's summit as partners. He said the alternative was a version of tomorrow that he did not think either side would benefit from. He said all of this in the same quiet, level tone he had used to ask about Savrak's journey to the station. Then he picked up his pen and looked down at his notes. He asked if there were any questions. Savrak said nothing for a long time. The deputy had moved away from the wall and was standing very still. His breathing was slightly altered. He would not look at Arden. Savrak finally said the meeting was concluded. Arden thanked him for his time. He stayed in the room after they left, finished his notes, and sat quietly for a while in the empty chamber, listening to the sound of the station moving around him. There was no recording of what happened in the neutral chamber. Both parties had signed the agreement. Arden had swept the room. The device he found was face down on the table when Savrak arrived and had not been activated. By every measurable standard, the meeting was private, and its contents were protected under station diplomatic protocol. By evening, half the station seemed to know something had happened. Not the details, not the specifics, but word moved through Velmoran the way it always moved through places where many species lived in close quarters, in the texture of behavior rather than in language. The Drekken deputy had been seen walking with a careful, deliberate stillness that was different from his usual stride. 2 of Savrak's staff had made quiet inquiries through back channels to the station's medical unit. Not for treatment, just for information, the kind of inquiry someone makes when they want to understand what was done to them. Savrak himself had canceled 2 social engagements that his schedule showed as confirmed, and had not left his delegation's private section since the meeting ended. All of this was observable, and on a station like Velmoran, where intelligence gathering was as common as breathing, many people observed it. The Mervaki delegation was first. Their chief analyst, a sharp-featured creature with pale gray skin and 4 fingers on each hand, sent a low-priority data request to the station's visitor registry within 2 hours of the meeting's conclusion. The request was for the full arrival record of the human diplomatic envoy name, origin point, prior station visits, and any associated security flags. The registry returned what was public. It was not much. The analyst then sent a secondary request through a different channel to a contact in the Human Diplomatic Corps, asking for background on the assignment. The contact sent back a file. The file was 3 pages long. 2.5 of those pages were black redaction blocks. The analyst stared at the shape of what was missing for a long time. On the Thavari section of the residential level, an elder named Davin sat in a wide chair with a cup of something warm and said nothing for most of the afternoon. His junior aide, a young Thavari named Say, recently assigned and still adjusting to station life, eventually asked him what he was thinking about. Davin told her he was thinking about a pattern. Say asked what kind of pattern. He said the conclave had, over its long history, encountered many species at many different points in their development. Most species arrived at galactic membership in one of 2 conditions. Either they had found a way to resolve their internal conflicts before reaching the stars, and they came to the conclave relatively peaceful but untested. Or they had not resolved anything. They had simply expanded outward while still carrying all of it, all the old training, all the old instincts, everything their history had built into them across thousands of years of survival. Say said that humanity seemed like the second kind. Davin said that was what made them interesting. He said most species in the second category announced themselves. They arrived loud, aggressive, obviously dangerous, and the conclave adjusted accordingly. It was an understandable pattern. Being obvious about strength was a reasonable strategy when strength was what you had. He said what he had never seen before, not in 400 years of observation, was a species in the second category that had learned to look like the first. Say thought about this. She asked if that made them more dangerous. Davin said it made them something the conclave had no category for yet. He said the Drekken delegation had made the same error that many powerful species made, which was to assume that politeness was weakness, that patience was uncertainty, that a species which preferred to talk was a species that could not do anything else. He looked toward the window that showed the station's central atrium far below, where, if you looked carefully, you could see the human diplomat sitting at a public bench, eating something from a small container with complete calm. Davin said the most dangerous moment in any negotiation was not when someone threatened you. He said the most dangerous moment was when someone who could have threatened you had chosen, so far, not to. Say watched the human diplomat for a while. She asked Davin what he thought would happen at the summit tomorrow. He said he did not know. He said it depended on whether the Drekken delegation had learned anything from today, and whether the Mervaki delegation had the sense to stay out of something that was not their problem. He said he would be watching very carefully. In the human diplomatic quarters, Arden wrote his nightly report to Geneva. It was precise and brief. He described the pre-summit meeting, noted the deputy's action and his response to it, assessed the current stance of both the Drekken and Mervaki delegations, and outlined his approach for the following day's session. He flagged the Mervaki intelligence inquiries. He had been informed of them through his own channels within an hour of them being made, and recommended that Geneva review the Mervaki delegation's recent voting record for any alignment with Drekken interests. He ended the report with a single line that read, "Summit conditions are manageable, proceeding as planned." He sent it, closed the tablet, and looked at the ceiling for a while. Then he opened his notebook and wrote something that was not for the report. He wrote, "They pushed an old man to the floor in front of 40 species and expected a complaint form. Tomorrow, they will understand the difference between what humanity sends and what humanity keeps quiet." He closed the notebook. He turned off the light. The conclave summit opened at the 9th hour of the station's internal clock. The chamber was the largest on Vel Morin, tiered seating for 63 delegations, a central speaker's floor ringed by translation nodes, and a ceiling so high that the upper rows disappeared into ambient light. It was a room built to feel permanent, to make whatever happened inside it feel like it mattered. Arden walked in 4 minutes before the session was called to order. He carried his notebook and one folder. He sat in the human delegation's assigned position, alone, and placed both items on the table in front of him. He did not look around the room. He did not need to. He had memorized the seating chart the night before. The Drekin delegation arrived. Savrek led them to their seats, assigned positions, not the head position they had occupied at the previous session. Arden had filed a procedural correction the night before, citing Section 12 of the Conclave's Standard Summit Framework, which specified that seating was to be assigned by membership tenure, not by informal precedent. The Drekin position was technically 4 rows back from where they had placed themselves before. Savrek sat without argument. His deputy, walking carefully, sat beside him and stared forward. The session opened with routine business budget amendments, a trade clarification between the Salvine and Harathi delegations, a structural maintenance report from the Station Council. Arden sat through all of it with the same attention he gave everything, which was complete and unremarkable. Several delegations watched him. He did not appear to notice. The Mervaki moved on the 42nd minute. Their lead delegate, a composed creature named Drev, known in the conclave for procedural precision, raised a motion under Section 8 of the governance framework. The motion proposed a temporary suspension of voting rights for any delegation under active diplomatic review. The language was careful. It did not name humanity. It did not need to. The recent incident involving the human delegation's previous ambassador was technically still in the preliminary stages of an ethics review, a standard process that had been filed the day after Walden's fall and had not yet been closed. Under Drev's motion, that review would be sufficient grounds to suspend humanity's vote for the duration of the summit. It was clean, it was procedurally defensible, and it had clearly been prepared before this session, which meant it had been prepared in coordination with someone who knew what condition the review was in. Arden looked at Drev, then he looked at Savrek. Savrek was watching the speaker's floor with an expression of careful neutrality, too careful. Arden wrote one word in his notebook, then he stood. The translation nodes registered him as a speaker and activated. His voice, when he spoke, was the same as it always was: level, unhurried, clear. He said he would like to respond to the motion. Drev, still standing, said that the motion was procedurally in order and that the chair could open it for discussion. The session chair, a senior Harathi official with no visible stake in either side, confirmed that discussion was permitted. Arden nodded and said he had no objection to the motion being heard. He said, in fact, he thought it was an interesting moment, because Section 8 had not been invoked in 14 years, and the last time it had been used was to suspend the voting rights of the Drekin delegation during a border arbitration dispute with the Velori system. The room was quiet. Arden continued. He said he was raising that point not as a counterargument but simply as context. He said he believed the chamber deserved full context when making decisions of this kind. He said he had taken the liberty of reviewing the complete history of Section 8 applications and had prepared a summary, which he was happy to enter into the session record. He opened his folder and slid a copy to the session secretary. He said the summary also included a review of humanity's full voting record since joining the conclave. Every motion, every position, every allied vote over 12 years. He said he thought it was important for delegations to understand what they were proposing to suspend. Drev began to say something. Arden did not raise his voice over him. He simply continued. He said he also wanted to address something that had not yet been named in this chamber, but that he believed was present in the room. He said that the incident involving Ambassador Walden had been called a diplomatic matter, and that the standard process was underway, and that humanity fully respected that process. He said, however, that the conclave should be careful about what precedents it set regarding the physical treatment of its members' representatives. He said humanity had been, Thus far patient about that. He said the word patient the way someone says a word when they have chosen it very precisely. Then he said he wanted to read one thing into the record, not from any document but from memory. He cited by date, name, and outcome 7 separate historical engagements from humanity's pre-contact period, conflicts that most species in the room had never heard of, because they had happened before humanity reached the stars, in the long and unobserved centuries when humans had only each other to fight. He gave numbers. He gave durations. He described the conditions. He kept his voice completely steady. He said he was not reading this as a threat. He said he was reading it because he believed the conclave, when making decisions about humanity, should have accurate information about what humanity was. He said he would sit down now, and he was happy to continue discussion if the chamber wished. He sat down. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Drev looked at his notes. Then he looked at the session chair and said the Mervaki delegation wished to withdraw the motion for further review. The session chair confirmed the withdrawal. Savrak did not say anything for the rest of the session. The summit ended without further incident. The remaining sessions covered trade framework amendments, a water rights arbitration between 2 outer systems, and a proposal from the Harathi delegation regarding shared navigational data in the contested corridor near the Solving border. Arden voted on each item according to humanity's established positions. He did not speak again unless directly addressed. When the final session closed, he packed his folder, put his notebook in his jacket pocket, and walked out with the same unhurried pace he had walked in with. Several delegates watched him leave. None of them spoke to him in the chamber. 3 did afterward in the corridor. The first was a solving trade representative who caught up to him near the exit and said, in careful common tongue, that she had found his historical citations very thorough. She said her delegation had always believed humanity was an underestimated presence in the conclave. She asked if the Human Mission Office would be open to a preliminary conversation regarding the navigational corridor proposal. Arden said yes, and gave her the contact details for the mission office on Earth. The second was a junior delegate from the Rithali system, a small, quiet species with no particular influence, who stopped him and said simply that what he had done in the chamber was the first time in 9 years of attending summits that he had seen someone make a Section 8 motion disappear without raising their voice. He did not ask for anything. He just said it. Arden thanked him and kept walking. The third was Davin. The Thavari elder was waiting near the end of the corridor, standing with the particular stillness of someone who was not waiting by accident. He did not move when Arden approached. He looked at him with the slow, complete attention of something very old that was accustomed to taking its time. Arden stopped. Davin said he had been in the conclave for a long time. He said he had seen many things. He said he had watched species arrive and fail and recover and grow and collapse, and that after enough years, most things began to look familiar. He said humanity did not look familiar. Arden said he appreciated that. Davin said he was not certain it was a compliment. He said the unfamiliar was not always comfortable. He said what he had observed over the past 2 days was a species that had made a choice, a deliberate, considered choice, about how to present itself to the galaxy. He said that choice was interesting. He said it was also, from his perspective, somewhat frightening, and that he thought Arden should know that. Arden looked at him for a moment. He said he understood. He said humanity had made many choices over many years, and not all of them had been good ones, and they were still learning which kind this was. Davin was quiet for a moment. Then he said something in an old Thavari dialect that his translator did not render into common tongue. He repeated it once, then said the closest approximation in common tongue was something like, "We see you now." He walked away. Arden stood in the corridor alone for a moment. Then he walked to the docking level and boarded the transport. The report he sent to Geneva from the transit ship was longer than usual. He detailed the Mervaki motion and its withdrawal, the 3 post-summit approaches, the Drekken delegation's behavior throughout the session, and a recommendation that the conclave's internal review of the Walden incident be followed closely to ensure it reached a formal conclusion. He noted that the ethics review, once complete, would either produce a reprimand that could be built on or a dismissal that would tell its own story about the conclave's internal dynamics. He included a separate section on the Thavari elders' comments. He did not try to interpret them fully. He just reported what was said. At the end of the report, in the section marked Personal Assessment, he wrote 4 sentences. He wrote that the situation at Vel Morin had been managed within acceptable parameters. He wrote that humanity's position in the conclave was unchanged in formal terms, but that informal assessments were shifting in ways that would take time to measure. He wrote that the next challenge would not come from the Drekin delegation, which had learned something it would take time to process, but from the species that had been watching and drawing their own conclusions. He wrote that those conclusions were not yet clear, and that this was the part that required the most attention going forward. He sent the report. He closed the tablet. He leaned back in the transport seat and looked at the stars moving past the small window beside him. Back on Vel Morin, Ambassador Walden received a copy of the summit record. He read through it slowly at the desk in his recovery quarters, still with a small bandage on his palm. He read Arden's session remarks 3 times. He sat for a while after that, looking at nothing in particular. Then he wrote a short note to the mission office and asked them to extend his formal thanks to Arden Cole. He did not know what exactly had happened in the neutral chamber, and he had not asked. Some things, in diplomacy as in other work, did not need to be said directly to be understood. In Geneva, one official added a single line to Arden Cole's file. The line read, "Mission resolved." Arden was already on his way to the next assignment.